So I'm Amber from Farming Forward. You will also see Carrie from Farming Forward. She's our director, and sorry, I'm the communications and our extension and communications coordinator. And you'll also see Leanna, our research coordinator, or tech, in the crowd. And then we have a couple great people to do some presentations tonight. There will be a little bit of a off-calf presentation, a really short one from hopefully from Erica, just so you guys know what's going on after the presentation. So if you're interested in learning about some funding, maybe stick around. But I will pass it on to Sharon to start out with Leduc. And perfect. Thanks for being here tonight.
All right, thanks, Amber. Yeah, as Amber said, I'm Sharon Fay with Ladue County. I'm the local food coordinator there, and we're really happy that there's so much interest in this. That's pretty exciting for us. So, before I introduce our speaker, just to let you know what's happening, we'll have a presentation which is about an hour, and then the last 20 to 30 minutes will be for Q&A. So as we go along, please put your questions in the chat, and then Amber will be gathering them up, and she'll address the speaker with the questions at the end. And then, as Amber mentioned, we also have someone from OFCAF, so we talking about OFCAF, so we hope that they'll be able to join us at some point. Okay, so my next slide here. So this is the second webinar out of our three-part series, Sheep 101. And we have some great partners that have helped us in planning this series. So we have the Alberta Goat Association, Alberta Lamb Producers, and Alpaca Livestock Producers and Cooperators Association. And besides them, we also have some support from ARDAR and Saskatchewan Agriculture. So we're grateful for all of you. So our talk this evening is Sheep 101, and we have Adrian Good, who works with Saskatchewan Agriculture out of Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan. Adrian is passionate about assisting livestock producers to manage and improve their herds and flocks. As a livestock and feed extension specialist, she assists producers with questions regarding nutrition, reproduction, welfare, and general management. Now, prior to joining the team at the Saskatchewan Ministry of Agriculture, Adrian spent 5 years as an agricultural extension agent for Montana State University Extension. She has personal experience with sheep and feedlot production, and she holds both a Bachelor of Science in Agriculture and a Master of Science from the University of Saskatchewan, both in animal science. So welcome, Adrian, and I'll let you take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Sharon. I will just get my screen shared here. If you could stop sharing yours.
Mm-hmm. You should be able to now.
There you go. And you're seeing the PowerPoint? Perfect. All right. So I'm very excited to be doing this talk. I was not expecting 80 some people here, so that is awesome. I am so happy to see so many people interested in sheep. Quick introduction, even though Sharon just read my bio from the website, I have long been an enthusiast of all things ruminant. If it has a ruminant 4 legs, I'll probably find a way to try and interact with it. So I grew up in 4-H. I see a lot of Southern people. I am from the South like you. So I understand the world of drought very well. So quick outline, what we're going to dive into today, nutrition basics, and these are going to be very basic. Had I known there were going to be some more 4-H members on here, I would have gone a little more into depth on some lamb nutrition, but you can ask me about that later. We'll do some quick touching on housing because we had a few questions on that, and then I'm going to just wrap up with a few other practices to keep in mind at the end. So nutrition basics, and I don't know where anybody's ruminant nutrition knowledge lays. So we're just going to start at the bottom here. Sheep are ruminant animals, which means they have a 4-compartment stomach. They've got the rumen, reticulum, omasum, abomasum. Those first 3 are fermentation chambers. They do the bulk of the digestion. And then the fourth chamber, the abomasum, is the true stomach where it will digest just like humans. So they have the feed, they eat their feed, it goes into the rumen. In the rumen, it'll get all mushed up, mushed together, mixed together. And then there was a whole bunch of microbes in there, more microbes than you can even imagine, and they will ferment that feed down. That feed will turn into microbial protein, volatile fatty acids, and some undigested material. Not everything will get broken down in the rumen. That will move through. Some of it will get absorbed. Some of that undigested material will get digested further through the digestive system in the abomasum and in the intestines. And some of it will move through the back end. I'm sure you all know about that part. So basic needs, we can divide into really 5 to 6 sections of the year. We've got lambing, weaning, summer grazing, breeding, and pregnancy. Should be simple. We've got 5 stages. However, problem is sheep are very highly variable in their needs. So we've got our wool sheep. The main focus with our wool sheep is creating wool. Creating wool has a whole huge set of nutrition requirements that might be slightly different than our other types of sheep. We've got our meat breeds. We're aiming for meat and fat. So their needs are going to be a little bit different. We've got our hair sheep, and they are just naturally a lighter muscled, slower growing type of animal. So we are not going to see the meat and the muscle gains on a hair sheep that we will see on our meat breeds like Suffolks and Hamps. That's okay. But you can't force protein into a hair sheep enough to get it to muscle like one of these other breeds. And then we've got our dairy sheep, and you can tell looking at the udder on this dairy sheep compared to this hair sheep, they put a lot into milk. That's what they're made for. So they have a whole different host of needs that we are not going to talk about today because I really like meat animals and I don't deal with dairy animals a lot. So with beef cattle, when we make nutrition requirements, we use these rules of thumb. It's 6 numbers, easy peasy. We can give someone a nutrition recommendation really quick. With sheep though, we don't have rules of thumb. I've attempted to make some, and I think there's about 20 numbers to look at. So we don't really have rules of thumb, but I'm doing my best to kind of give you an idea of when needs are high, when they're low, etc. So let's start with my favorite time of year, lambing. Needs are really high. These ewes are trying to put back condition that they might have lost during pregnancy, and they're trying to keep those lambs alive. If they are milking twins or triplets, they've got to produce a lot of milk. And if it's cold, they're going to have higher requirements. And we'll go into that a little bit later in the shelter part. But those needs are really high to produce milk. Peak milk production will be about 6 weeks after lambing. So once you hit that 6-week mark, you're probably as high as you're going to get, and you can drop back the nutrition a little bit. Don't totally take all their grain away, but you can back it off a bit. Your key concerns at this time of year are going to be milk yield. If your ewes aren't yielding enough milk, those babies got nothing to eat. Milk quality, it's really important. We need good quality milk. And colostrum production. I had a professor say colostrum is nature's rocket fuel, and I 100% agree with him. It is full of fat, full of sugar, full of a lot of really good immunity for those babies. If our ewes aren't getting enough nutrition, the lambs won't get good colostrum and we'll have a bit of a disaster. So a question that comes up a lot is, what about creep feeding? So first question is, what is creep feeding? It's essentially just providing extra nutrition to those lambs while they're young, while they're still milking or still sucking, and able to eat grain, get a little best of both worlds. So there's some pros and cons to creep feeding. The pro is it can provide extra nutrition. So you can kind of give your ewes a bit of a break if you're asking a lot of them, if you're asking those lambs to grow really fast. You can add a little bit, give those ewes a break. You can increase your weaning weight, get those lambs on feed a lot faster. It'll stimulate rumen development, which we'll talk about in the next slide, and reduce stress at weaning. Weaning is stressful for everybody involved. And if those lambs already know what feed looks like, then that's one less thing to be stressed about after they've been ripped away from their ewe and they're confused about what's going on. But if they recognize the feed, they're good to go. So some cons, they could be more susceptible to overeating disease, also known as enterotoxemia. It's a common thing sheep get related to eating high amounts of grain. They could be more susceptible if you creep feed them. Breeding animals may remember the creep feeder, which may not sound too horrible, but if you know sheep, they have the stereotype of finding creative ways to die. And a ewe who tries to fit through a creep feeder is probably not going to have a great time. And then cost is going to be the other factor. If you're already paying a lot to feed those ewes and you have to pay more for feed for your lambs, it might be a bit of a toss-up. So the question is, what should you use for creep feed? And this is taken from a paper they did in Malaysia using boar kids. So what they did is they took these kids and they either just fed them straight on milk, milk plus a pellet made of corn and soy, or milk plus that pellet with corn and soy, plus a good alfalfa hay. So what you're seeing here, they're not Rice Krispie squares. These are the papillae in the rumen. They kind of look like little fingers, and they are really important for absorbing all those nutrients that get produced in the rumen from the fermentation. So the more surface area we have in our papillae, the more nutrients get absorbed, essentially. So A over here, these are the kids that were only fed on milk. They do not have a lot of rumen papillae development. Over here, B, these guys had the milk plus the pellet, and C had the milk, the pellet, and the hay. So as we get more feed into those rumens, the rumen is starting to develop more, starting to be able to really function and help those lambs down the line. And here's some numbers, which may not be super thrilling to look at, but this box here, the muscular thickness, one of the muscle layers of the rumen. A rumen will contract once a minute. So every minute it is squeezing, releasing, working that feed around, turning it around. The muscle layer, one of these layers here, is 1,150 micrometers for the kids fed the pellet plus the hay plus milk versus 823 for the kids fed only milk. So just adding that forage, stimulating that rumen development really adds a lot of muscle to the rumen. If we look at papilla length, the kids fed just the pellet. They did a little bit better, which we kind of expected because grain really encourages papillae development in young ruminants. But the forage plus pellet guys also did okay. They have a little over double the papilla length of those kids only fed milk. And the most surface area on the papillae, so the most area available to absorb nutrients, is in that pellet plus forage group, closely followed by the pellet only. So this is a lot of numbers to say creep feeding is actually really helpful to getting that rumen going. I have heard a presentation where he said you absolutely have to creep feed. That's not true. You don't have to. But you can really help the rumen out if you start creep feeding. And if they're creep fed, you're getting more digestibility. You're going to get more performance out of those lambs later in life. So your creep feed needs good quality forage. Chances are your ewes are probably getting a pretty good quality forage during lambing, so should have that covered. And then some sort of concentrate. You can buy pre-formulated pellets, and those work great. Or you can just use grain. That works pretty good. Make sure there's enough protein in it, probably 12-13% for these little lambs. Flavor can also help. If you get some dried molasses, sprinkle it in there, it's sweet, they want to go for it. Could use salt, could use something sweet like soybean meal is pretty palatable. Distiller's grain can be. So you don't really need anything fancy, just something to get them interested in eating. So that's our lambing time, and I know I'm flying through this nutrition stuff really fast, so we can go back and have questions later. Weaning. So I love this photo. A coworker took it this spring. This lamb just looks so fed up with life. So at weaning time, our needs for the ewe really decrease. We don't need them to milk anymore. So this is the time when you can really back off on the grain. You can even back off a little before weaning, just help them dry up. But the needs really increase for the lambs because they're not getting anything from the ewe anymore. So you've really got to push the protein, push the energy, and push the good forage for these lambs. And I'm not really going to go further than that on the lambs, but mineral nutrition is really important here. And mineral nutrition is really important year round. We have some very interesting cases we're working on right now where the minerals are all out of whack. I'm focusing on weaning though, because that is a really high stress time. So making sure your minerals are really good at this time can really help. So we have two classes of minerals. We've got our macro minerals and our trace minerals. They're equally important. The macro minerals are required in grams and the trace minerals are required in milligrams. So I think everybody knows calcium is important for bones. It works really closely with phosphorus, and they are both really important for bones, milk production, and muscle function. If we don't have enough calcium, your muscles cannot move. Magnesium and potassium also work really closely with calcium, and they are important for water balance and functions of the animal's cells. Sodium and chloride, I think most people know what those are. They're pretty important for salt. Maintaining the water balance, making sure our sheep aren't getting dehydrated. And then sulfur, used by rumen microbes to create amino acids and B vitamins. It's also really important for wool because wool has a lot of sulfur-based amino acids in it. But I did have a coworker recently refer to sulfur as that crazy aunt. You love her and you need her, but she can be a little much sometimes. I know in southern Saskatchewan, and I think a lot of southern Alberta, we have really high sulfate water. So we can see too much sulfur. Our aunt needs to maybe take longer between visits here. So it's necessary, but we need to watch it. So when we go to trace minerals, these minerals that are required in smaller amounts, they're important for things like fertility and immunity. Iodine, I've recently learned, is really important for wool as well. So if your wool is really tough to shear, or you have lambs being born hairless, they're usually dead when that happens too, it could be an iodine issue. Manganese is important for bone growth. Selenium is important antioxidant. Cobalt, those blue salt blocks, those are really important because those cobalt turns into vitamin B12 in the rumen, which is important for energy metabolism. So actually using that energy that they're producing. So those are really important. And I'm going to highlight copper because I think a very common thing in the sheep industry is this idea that sheep cannot have any copper at all. And that is not true. They do need copper. Copper is really important for those female fertility and for immunity. So if we're seeing sick lambs open ewes at breeding, you might have a copper issue. They need it, but like sulfur, we can get a little bit too much. I know a lot of sheep minerals don't have copper in it at all. And I would argue they sometimes do, especially in the south with our crappy water. Adding copper to your sheep mineral can be pretty important. So when I say, especially in the south with our crappy water, minerals do not exist in a vacuum. They all interact with each other. So you wouldn't go out and just see some sulfur laying on the ground. You're going to go see a sodium sulfate ring around your dugout likely. All these minerals interact together and form complexes, and they can benefit each other sometimes. Usually they hinder each other. So I have sulfur highlighted here, again, because I work in the south. Sulfur interacts with zinc and molybdenum and copper and calcium and selenium. So if you're seeing deficiencies in any of these minerals, it could be actually too much sulfur. Another one is potassium interacts with sodium. If you're seeing too little of one, you could actually have too much of another. We have actually, again, recently discovered selenium and copper do also kind of bounce off each other sometimes. Iodine and selenium, there's some crosses that aren't on this wheel that I have recently discovered through working with producers. So if you're seeing some mineral issues, I really recommend testing, making sure they're on a good, strong mineral, because minerals are really important for muscle function, bone strength, immunity, and fertility. And those are all things that we need to see in our sheep, whether they are weaned lambs, pregnant ewes just hanging out on grass. Minerals are important. And the reason I have it in weaning is because stress impacts not so much muscle function and bone strength, but it impacts immunity and fertility. So think about it. We have a bunch of people in my office who have just come back from mat leave, and all of them, their first week they were supposed to be back, their kids got sick at daycare. Why is that? Well, these kids were stressed and put in a room full of other kids with other germs. So the stress brings their immunity level down. Boom, germs, sick. Now, if they had been put in the room with other kids and mom was still there, they might have been okay, because stress really hampers immune function. Same thing is happening with these lambs. They're stressed out, immune function's coming down. So when I talk about with minerals with people, chelated is a more absorbable form of mineral, and they are more expensive. So I say if you want to cheap out and only use them sometimes of the year, use them during weaning, pregnancy, and breeding. You can probably get away with a cheaper mineral the rest of the year. And I could go for hours talking about mineral, so I'm going to limit myself there. But again, if you have questions, we can go over it later. So we're going to kick the lambs out there. And again, I did not realize there were so many 4-H groups joining, which is awesome. I love to hear that. But I'm not talking about the lambs anymore, so I can try and get into some growing and finishing maybe at the end if we have time. So we'll go into summer grazing. These are the lowest needs of the year. Ewes are in maintenance phase. They're just hanging out. So when I say lowest needs of the year, that's not they don't have any needs. They do still need to meet those energy, protein requirements, vitamins and minerals. They need to have grass there to graze. And I know people seem to think sheep don't need to eat a lot, but they do, probably 10 pounds of grass a day per ewe. So they need a lot of grass there. And I know August, especially in the south, it gets dry. All that's left is brown crested wheat, and that is not enough for you, even though she's in her chill maintenance phase. She actually needs some feed. So if your pastures are getting dry, you might have to supplement. Flushing pre-breeding is a very common practice. It has been for a while, but there's some new science coming out that says, well, if they're in good condition, you don't really have to. So it's up to you. You might want to flush, just really increase that nutrition before breeding. But if they're in good condition, you might be okay without it. So your first question might be, how do I know if they're in good condition? So this is where getting your hands on them, feeling them up is really important. Body condition scoring, you're going to score them from a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being emaciated, 5 being obese, and 3 being about ideal. And you're going to get your hands on them and feel them over the spinous and the transverse parts of the lumbar vertebrae. So right around where their loin is, the up and down part and the sideways part. It's hard to describe on a Zoom, but up and down, sideways, and then in their sternum. And you'll feel how those bones feel. So if you run your fingers over, I guess that's the second part of your finger, they'll feel sharp and pointy. If your ewe's vertebrae and sternum feel sharp and pointy like that, that is very thin. They're probably in a 1 to 2. If you come up on your wrist, now I know there's only one bone here for us, but if their ribs or their vertebrae feel like this, and you cannot feel the edges of the bones at all, that is a 5, that's obese. We want to be somewhere in the middle. When we get into pregnancy, we can go a little further down into the 2 to 2.5. But right around 3 is pretty ideal. And I do have a video linked at the end of the presentation that has a video on body condition scoring. That's not just me touching my hand, that is actually using sheep. But this is a really good idea to do anytime you're working the ewes. So whether that's vaccination, hoof trimming, loading them onto a trailer, get your hands on them. You don't have to get your hands on every single ewe. Every 5th ewe that comes past you is good, just to get a good idea of what the condition of your flock is like. So flushing, the theory is that providing extra nutrition will restore those body reserves, stimulate ovulation, and ensure the fetus has adequate nutrition. So here is a lot of numbers, and the main thing, I should have shrunk this box here, is our ovulation rate. We're just going to look at the 2 broader categories. We've got a low plane of nutrition and a high plane of nutrition. So those ewes for 8 weeks prior to ovulation on the low plane, their ovulation was a lot lower than those ewes on the high plane of nutrition. I can't remember exactly what those diets looked like, but the positive lupins, those would be higher in protein. But those ewes were brought up in nutrition, ovulated a little bit more. So again, if they're in good condition already, they might not need this, but it also wouldn't hurt. Now, if your ewes are at a 4 or a 5 on body condition score, I would not flush. I would try to bring them back down, lose some weight, because being too fat at breeding can limit fertility and can cause all sorts of problems during lambing. All right, that's breeding, or that's grazing. When we get into breeding, so your needs during breeding are relatively low. If your flushing was successful or if they're in good condition, not a lot needs to change. This is also your last chance to improve their condition if you need to before lambing. Because once they are pregnant, it is all hands on deck. Get as much feed as you can into that ewe to just maintain. So you need to get her into shape now if you are going to get her through lambing. This is also when your rams are at their peak nutritional need. And I'm not saying this to say, the rams need their own little treat bucket aside from anyone else. They'll do fine on whatever your ewes are on, but kind of keep an eye on them. If they're working really hard, they might lose a bit of weight. I wouldn't panic unless they start looking really emaciated. I just felt the boys needed a little mention here. All right, now we're getting into my favorite stuff. So pregnancies. During pregnancy, a ewe has super high nutrient requirements. As that pregnancy progresses, nutrient requirements skyrocket. At the same time, their intake decreases and their body weight increases. So I have some really old studies to show you. So this one is from 1973. The solid line is a pregnant ewe. The dotted line here is not pregnant. And they're looking at their body weight through the week of pregnancy, or not pregnancy is the non-pregnant one, and looking at the weight of the uterine contents. And there is about a 12 kilogram difference in the ewe weight between the pregnant ewe and the non-pregnant ewe. So they are gaining a lot of weight while pregnant. But that weight is not all on the ewe. So this one's from 1974. This is showing how much weight that ewe is carrying in fetus. So if we have triplets at 120 days pregnant, so this is about 3 weeks before lambing, that is 11 kilograms of fetus. Really high plain nutrition ewe carrying twins, we're looking at the 11 to 12 kilograms of fetus. So there is a lot of weight, and this is from 1974. Birth weights and ewe weights have increased since then. I was watching a webinar out of Scotland about a year ago, and it is very possible for a ewe to be carrying 30 pounds of fetus right before lambing. So when you think about it, that's over 10% of her body weight, likely. She has got a lot of lamb in there. So when we look at our intake decrease, and it's not just we've seen it happen, this has been documented again, 60s and 70s, I got to do the cool science. That increase, or that intake decreases from just under 2% of their body weight. If they're carrying triplets, we can come all the way down to below 1% of their body weight. And this is my favorite picture. So this is, you can tell this is not recent science because there's no way you could do this now. They took ewes, got them pregnant, killed them, froze them, cut them in half. So this is a non-pregnant ewe. We've got her rumen and all her ruminal contents here. We've got her liver and her kidneys over here and intestines here. So she's got a decent amount of space for feed here. This ewe is fairly pregnant. I can't remember what week, but I'd say pretty late, judging by this. This is all lamb. So we see that her rumen has shrunk from this huge amount to this little fraction of the body cavity here. So she physically cannot eat as much feed as we need her to because these lambs are taking up so much space. What's the big deal with that? Pregnancy toxemia is very common in sheep. They're essentially taking all of their energy out of their own reserves, putting it into growing these lambs and making colostrum. And then by the time they lamb, they go down. They can't get up anymore. They're spent. It is possible to bring them back. It's very difficult. Milk fever will look very similar. Tetany, so this will be like tetanus, their muscles will seize because they just don't have the minerals available to keep those muscles moving. You'll see poor colostrum production, which, you know, compared to ewe goes down and dies, may seem minor, but you can also see a low birth weight. And those two things combined, your lambs are going to have a really low chance of survival. So we need to make sure those pregnancy needs are met and that you can keep that feed of those lambs going, because we are asking a lot of her, especially if you have ewes who are having triplets or quads or more than that, because it is possible. So it's really important to think about, if your ewes are commonly having triplets, you really need to shovel as much grain into them as you can. So that completes our cycle minus the lambs. And you're thinking, great, you didn't actually tell me how to do anything. You just said they need feed. So what can you do about it? Easy one, and because I'm from Southern Saskatchewan, I never shut up about it. Water testing, very important. Water quality is hugely important to all our livestock. Why do we care? Sheep consume 2 to 3 gallons of water a day. That's going to be more than that if it's hot. Poor quality water equals reduced water intake and potential mineral toxicities. Think about that mineral wheel. If we have a lot of iron in our water, what's it binding up that we need? Reduced water intake will also affect your feed intake. So if we have poor quality water and our ewes are super pregnant and they're already not eating, and now we have reduced feed intake because of bad water, we're going to have a disaster with our ewes. Reduced mineral intake, the only nutrient that animals will really seek out is salt, and mineral is salty. So if they're getting their salt through their water, they're not going to eat their mineral. You can see reduced milk production, because water is a really important component of milk, and reduced lamb growth because they have reduced feed intake, reduced mineral intake, reduced milk production. This is with cows instead of sheep, but they did a study at U of S 20 years ago now that calves with access to clean pumped water were 18 pounds heavier at weaning time than calves whose dams did not, who just had direct access to the dugout. So you can actually see a pretty significant difference in the young on animals who have good water. Feed testing is the other important step here. I preach feed testing this time of year all day, every day. So I've got my 2 bales here. When you test feed test, or when you test your forages, if it's a round bale, you're going to take a probe and put it into the round side of the bale so that you're going across multiple swaths. And if it's a square bale, you're going to go on the end, like through all the flakes. I did not ask any of you folks in Alberta, but I'm sure like most of your feed companies would have feed probes and be able to help feed test. So do you actually need to feed test? So we've started in our office just kind of keeping an eye on what we're seeing in feed tests that we see through our office. So I represent about a third of Southern Saskatchewan in my office. So these are some of the samples we've seen this year. And I've got 3 highlighted here. So this barley green feed, out of 12 samples we feed tested, we've seen total digestible nutrients, which is a measure of energy. We've seen it range from 57 to 69, with the average being 59. And I would say, before looking at this data, I would say about 63 would be average for barley green feed. So if we're expecting 63 and we're only getting 59, this is actually a huge decrease in energy availability. So we are underfeeding our animals. And if this is in peak gestation, we're causing problems with their use. If we come down here to this alfalfa grass, this protein, we have a maximum of 18.6. That was a really high protein sample. So if we think we're feeding 12 to 13%, but we're only feeding our minimum of 6%, this can cause a lot of problems too. If we don't have enough protein, the rumen can't function. It needs that protein to feed the microbes to keep fermenting. So we're not getting energy, we're not getting enough protein. Those lambs aren't going to make it. Those ewes are going to have a hard time. If you're trying to grow your lambs, they're not going to grow. So protein, we need to know what's going on. NDF is neutral detergent fiber. This is a driver of intake. If we have too high of neutral detergent fiber, they simply cannot eat enough. So this is an alfalfa hay 46 is about average, I'd say, for alfalfa. But if we're expecting that, but we have 56, again, we cannot get enough hay into them because they physically cannot eat it. The rumen will fill up and they're going to be done. So feed testing is really, really, really important. Again, if you're looking for a money saving, I would say grains are going to be more stable than forages will. I say this with a grain of salt. And your straws, the likelihood of including a straw at a really high level in a ewe ration is going to be pretty low. So you can probably get away with not testing straws. But I would test any hays or silages for sure. And screenings are another one. Screenings are so wildly variable. So what should you be testing for? Most samples you should test for moisture. This is especially important if you're testing silage, crude protein, total digestible nutrients, or another energy calculation, neutral and acid detergent fiber, and minerals. Most labs will have a base package with all of this in it, with mostly the macro minerals. Nitrates are another key one, especially you folks in the South. Nitrates are going to be something to worry about. It can be caused by frost or drought stress. I've seen a lot of drought stressed hays this year. If you have salvaged a cereal crop that was fertilized for grain production and you salvaged it for feed, you're going to want to test that for nitrates. Canola loves to accumulate nitrates, and weeds, kochia, any of the pig weeds. There's a few other that really like to accumulate nitrates. So if you've got a lot of kochia in your hay, you're going to want to test it for nitrates. And then if you're seeing fusarium or ergot or any sort of mold, regardless of what color it is, probably a mycotoxin and ergot screen doesn't help. I forgot to check to see if the U of C vet school tests for these, but I would assume they do. I know Prairie Diagnostic at the U of S does test. It's about $250 for both of those, which does sound like a lot, but it's cheaper than a bunch of dead ewes. So this is what a feed test will look like. You'll see a whole bunch of parameters here on the left and two columns, one with as fed and one with dry. And we're always going to look at the dry column. So this is really giving us an ability to compare each feed to each other, because if you're looking at a silage, it's going to look like it has really low protein as fed because there's just so much water in it. So if we take it down to our dry, we're comparing exactly how much is actually getting into the animal. So that box should be a little bit lower. Dry matter is something to look for. I wouldn't panic too hard on most things. Silage, you're really going to want to look at it. If we're seeing like 20% moisture in your hay, I would be concerned. You might have some mold issues, but generally we're not going to panic too bad about moisture. Crude protein, this is just the crude nitrogen that's in the sample. Again, as long as we're over, like this screening sample 17, this is going to be fine for protein for everything. Once we start getting into the 6, 7, 8s, we're going to have to be careful about how we feed that. This lab puts total digestible nutrients in with the fibers because it is calculated based on the fibers. But acid detergent fiber and neutral detergent fiber, very similar. Neutral detergent fiber is acid detergent fiber plus lignin. You don't really need to know that, but know that higher neutral detergent fiber means lower intake and higher acid detergent fiber means lower digestibility. Total digestible nutrients, very easy energy measure. Unless you're doing really fine-tuned, really intense rations, total digestible nutrients will get you all you need for energy. We do have the net energies here, and this is looking more at energy partitioning, how much of this feed this ewe is going to be using for lactation or gain or maintenance. Again, if you're doing just basic run-of-the-mill rations, TDN works fine. And then we've got the minerals. This lab includes a lot of the trace minerals, which I really like, especially because it includes our fun amp sulfur here. And I like to keep an eye on sulfur in everything I do. Copper is also another one you're going to want to keep an eye on for sheep. But you're going to want to look at the minerals again. And I don't have any of the max tolerable in this, but I can get it to you if you want to know. And then another one that is generally not a concern, but it might be a concern if you're feeding canola or screenings or something else that's really fatty, if you're feeding oils. 16.86 is wildly high fat for a ruminant. Ruminants don't like a lot of fat. You can get a lot of energy from fat, but ruminants don't really like anything over 6% fat. So we could not feed something with a crude fat this high at more than like a quarter of the diet because we want the rumen to keep functioning. We don't want the fat to slow anything down. So some feed testing labs, we work with Down to Earth Labs and A&L Labs a lot in our office. Both of them are really good. Down to Earth is very quick, so if you need nitrate results quick, I would recommend them. But both them and A&L are awesome to deal with. There is Cumberland Valley Analytical. This one charges in US dollars because it does go to BC first and then to their US lab. And then there's Central Testing out of Winnipeg. They do a pretty good job. Generally, I have seen questionable results on things like heated grain from them. So just kind of keep that in mind. And regardless of what lab you're using, I didn't put it in here, but I would go with wet chemistry over an NIR test. We recently saw an NIR test on, I think it was a silage that had 35% potassium. That is not possible. A silage cannot be 1/3 potassium. It would be a rock. So I would say go with wet chemistry. It's going to be a little more expensive, but you're going to get results that are actually trustworthy, especially if you're going to Ontario or the States or even Winnipeg. Those formulas that the NIR calculations are based on are going to be based on forage local to Ontario, and our prairie forage does not have a lot in common with Ontario forage. So your calculations might be a little off. So I would really strongly, the longer I work with producers, the more I recommend wet chemistry. So the most common question I get is, what's the cheapest way to feed my livestock? And the answer I always give to every question is, it depends. So when you're planning your rations, I'm not just going to tell you, feed this, done. We've got to ask some questions. You need to inventory your flock, not just count how many ewes you have, but what's your mature animal size? If you're lambing as a yearling, are they at their mature weight? What is their mature weight supposed to be? Preg check, do they have multiples? A yearling or a single versus a twin versus triplets are going to have really big nutrient requirement differences. Body condition score, do they need to lose weight? Do they need to gain weight? Which groups can you feed separately? Maybe you've got a ewe that's pregnant with a single, but is a body condition score of 1. You could probably feed her with a ewe that's pregnant with triplets, but is in good shape. So we want to kind of group them according to what their nutritional needs are. And then what's the best way to feed your flock? So if you have a TMR mixer and you're able to put a little bit of this, a little bit of this, a little bit of this, you know, we can get some of that hay, we can get some silage from our neighbor, whatever. We can go crazy and we can make your rations as precise as you want. But if you want to just throw some hay out and throw some grain out, we can do that too. Think about what's best for you, what works on your place. We don't all need to feed the same rations. You need to inventory the feeds you have on hand. This includes your feed tests, and this would also include bale weights. A 1,500-pound bale is going to have a totally different time you need to feed it than a 1,000-pound bale. So think about your bale weights, analyze your feed tests and your water, and decide which supplements and minerals you need to buy. And step 4 and 5 are kind of going to go together. Figure out what you need to buy and formulate a ration. So shout out to Alberta lamb producers here. Sheep bites is what I use to balance sheep rations for the most part. This is a quote from a fellow in Saskatchewan who has a few thousand ewes, so if he's using it, must be good enough for me too. It works really well. It's very user-friendly. I can't remember how much it costs, even though we just renewed our subscription. Jolene, if you could pop that in the chat. It's very user-friendly. Boxes turn green when you're good and red when you're bad. So very easy to use. Highly recommend Sheep Bites. I am going to show Pearson Square. It is an easy way to balance rations if you only have 2 feeds and you just need a quick rough idea of what you need to do. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to speed through it a little fast, but I'll do my best. So in the middle, we're going to draw a square, and we're going to put our requirement in here. And again, I don't have any requirements in this presentation because they're so different. But for a mature ewe, pregnant with twins in late gestation, she'll need 12.5% crude protein. So let's say we have an alfalfa grass hay that's 14.5% protein and barley grain that's 12% protein. So we take our alfalfa hay and our barley grain, 12%, 14.5. We're going to take 14.5 minus 12.5, you get 2. And then we're going to go across again, 12 minus 12.5, you get 0.5. And I realize that should be a negative. We're just taking absolute values here, take the negative sign off. So our total, we have 0.5 and 2, that makes 2.5. 0.5 is 20% of 2.5, or 0.5 divided by 2.5, you get 20. And 2 will be 80%. So this ration, to get 12.5% crude protein, we need 20% of alfalfa grass hay and 80% of this barley grain. Now, the barley grain might not be 12% protein. I just made that up so that this worked. So our sheep dry matter intake, 2.5 to 3% of their body weight. If she's pregnant with twins, we're probably closer to the 2.5, maybe less. So a 200-pound ewe will see a dry matter intake of 5 to 6 pounds. So at 20% of the ration, you'll need 1.1 pounds of the hay and 4.4 pounds of barley. And this is dry matter, so you're going to want to take the moisture into account. So if you've got 90% dry matter on your hay, you're going to want to divide that by 0.9 again. And I forgot to put that on the side, but it'll be closer to about 1.5 pounds of hay and close to about 5 pounds of barley. So I know that was fast, but we can go through Pearson squares again if necessary, or there's some really good resources online. Colorado State University Extension has a good Pearson square article. So this only looks at one nutrient, so we have no idea what the energy they're getting is from this ration. At 4 to 5 pounds of barley, they're probably meeting their energy requirements, but we don't know what their minerals look like. We don't know anything other than protein. So that's a pretty major limitation. And if we have more than 2 feeds, we can't do that together. I mean, you could make mixes and do multiple Pearson squares in together, but if you have more than 2, it's just going to be a headache. So when we get to implementing your rations, start your feeding program, that's not just one and done. We need to monitor the condition and performance. If you see your ewes are looking like crap, reevaluate, add some more grain. If you're like, ooh, they're maybe getting a little chunky, you got the wool off and you went, ooh, they got a little fat, we can maybe back them off a bit. And then adjust for changes in weather and performance. So that was speed run, sheep nutrition. So facilities is going to be even faster. So to think about facilities, what we need for our animals, we need to know about the thermoneutral zone. So the thermoneutral zone is just the ambient temperature in which an animal doesn't experience environmental stress and doesn't need to work to maintain normal body temperature. So for a sheep, that's about 0 to 25 degrees Celsius. I think it's pretty similar for me. So when we're below 0 degrees, we're going to be in cold stress. And when we're above 25, we're going to be in heat stress. So both cold and heat stress, we're going to see a drop in immunity because they're putting more energy into maintaining their core body temperature. We're going to see a decrease in feed intake. We're going to see some colostrum and milk production issues. In cold stress, we're probably going to see some lamb survival issues and reduced water intake. And in heat stress, you can see some ewe fertility and ram fertility issues. There's been some really interesting work with cattle where when a cow is pregnant in heat stress, the heifer that she's pregnant with will have lower fertility. So it is wild what heat stress can do to fertility. Cold stress and heat stress will both have increased feed requirements. This gets difficult because our cold stress usually happens during really pregnant, and heat stress, they don't want to eat, they'll go off feed. Cold stress, you'll see more huddling, which again, lambs are little and easily crushed, so you could see some more dead lambs. And in heat stress, you'll increase water requirements. This graphic is supposed to go out on our social media this week, so your guys are getting a sneak peek. Just when you are in cold stress, you need to give them extra grain. So I formulate my winter rations to -20. So when we're at -30, about a quarter pound extra grain per ewe will help them maintain some heat, kind of. If we drop down to -40, you'll need an extra half pound of grain. So this is the temperature at noon with no wind. So if we're getting into -50 with a wind chill, you're going to have to add quite a bit more grain. And when we are heavily pregnant, that's going to be tough. So do your best. You're not going to kill them in one day unless they overeat way too much grain, but you probably won't kill them in one day. So some barns do's and don'ts. Make sure you have adequate ventilation. There's some great resources out of Ontario for this. We don't want ammonia buildup. Make sure your bedding is clean and dry. Again, we don't want ammonia buildup. And wet, damp, hot bedding is a great place for bacteria to thrive. Keep your feeders and your waterers clean and sterilize your lambing jugs after each use. So when you pull your ewe into their pen to lamb, kick them out, all happy fun times, clean that jug out, sterilize it just in case. Don't overcrowd. Aim for at least 15 square feet per ewe or 8 for lambs and 16 to 20 inches per ewe at the feed bunk. And if you know cattle numbers, this seems extreme, but sheep all go and eat as a group. Cattle will kind of come back and forth. Sheep do everything as a unit. So if you don't have enough room at the feed bunk, some of them aren't going to get to eat. And don't use sawdust bedding. They're not that bright. They might try to eat it and they're not going to have a good time. It can also get in their wool and make shearing really tough. So windbreaks, this is another popular question I get. They are not meant to totally stop the wind. They are not a barn. They're just meant to slow it down. So ideally, you should have about 1 foot of clearance to avoid snow buildup on the bottom. And we want a 25 to 33% porosity. So we need gaps in these boards. And the reason that is because if we have a solid fence, the snow is going to go up, over, land right there. But if we have our 25 to 30% porosity, the snow will kind of blow through a little bit and it won't accumulate right beside the windbreak. So I have had questions like, oh, it's still cold when I'm standing on the other side of the windbreak. That is true, but it's even worse if there's a giant snowbank right there and they're nowhere near the windbreak. So a little bit of porosity is important. When we're looking at handling systems, abrupt change there from windbreaks, use natural behavior of the sheep to reduce stress for both them and for you. So like their flocking instinct. Sheep move towards other sheep and away from humans' dogs. Use that flocking instinct. Don't split them apart. If you need to bring one ewe in, bring a few with her so she doesn't lose her mind. They are prey animals, so they have a flight zone or a personal bubble, and they have a point of balance. So once you get in that flight zone, they're going to move away from you. Their point of balance is usually about at their shoulder blades. It's this point where if you stand on one side, they'll move the other way. If you stand on the other, they'll move the other way. So if you want them to move forward, you go behind their point of balance. And if you want them to move backwards or kind of away from you, you'll go in front of them. They don't like unfamiliar things and shadows. So if they're not wanting to go through a gate or something, are there shadows or weird spots? Look at it through their eyes. Sheep don't like wet feet. They will not go and drink out of a dugout the way cows were unless they're desperate. So if you've got a handling system and it's full of puddles, they're not going to be happy. So make sure things are dry. And older ewes can train your younger stock. They might not be the brightest animals, but they have this figured out. When the system works well, those old ewes will learn it and they'll train the younger ewes. On the flip side, if the system does not work well, the older ewes will know it doesn't work well and they will train the younger ewes. So just keep those things in mind when you're thinking about handling systems. So some other things to think about. Traceability. Make sure you have your CSIP tags, your premises identification number and manifests. And I don't know the Alberta laws anymore as well as I know the Saskatchewan ones. So if you have questions, I would contact LIS. Shearing, do it at least once a year and pick the best timing for your flock. It's going to come down to what works best for you. There is some neat research that says if you shear 6 to 8 weeks before lambing, you can increase your lamb birth weight. Nobody's really sure why yet, but it does work. So if you're having issues with low birth weight lambs, that's one thing you can look at doing. If you find they're getting super overheated when it's plus 40 and hot, you can shear in the spring. Do whatever works best for you. I'm not here to tell you how to run your farm. Flock health, even though I'm a nutritionist and I think every problem can be solved with nutrition, you should probably loop in your vet once in a while. So discuss your flock health with your vet, avoid dewormer resistance, talk to your vet for all of this stuff. Hoof trimming, really important to prevent or treat lameness issues in the flock. I do have a video on hoof trimming and that link is at the end here. Castrating and tail docking. Again, this is kind of straying into vet territory. So I would talk to your vet if you're really unsure. But the codes of practice have really good guides on how to castrate, how to tail dock. Abide by those. While they aren't necessarily the law, they can be used in welfare cases. So just make sure you're abiding by the codes of practice and you'll be okay. And then predation control. Sheep are tasty little morsels. So guard animals can be really helpful. Dogs are really popular. Donkeys can be used. I've heard there's some pretty tough donkeys in northern Saskatchewan that'll take wolves. Llamas sometimes. There's some information out there that cows might help guard sheep from coyotes. I've even seen ostriches mentioned once. So if it's mean and it doesn't like dogs, it'll probably protect your sheep. Strong fences and predation lights can also help, whether or not your predators will get used to those lights. Do the best you can. So that was a speed run for Sheep 101. Here are some really helpful resources. First one is our sheep video playlist that we made. I think they came out probably 6 months ago. We have a lot of really good resources for all livestock on our Saskatchewan.ca website. It's a pain in the butt to Google or to navigate that website. So if you Google Saskag sheep and goats, it'll take you there. The codes of practice I have linked in here. Ontario Ministry of Agriculture has some really good sheep resources. I steal a lot of things from them. And then I'm also going to plug the American Sheep Industry Sheep Production Manual. It is American, so there are some things that don't necessarily apply to us. And I think it's like $200 Canadian. It's about 3 inches thick, but it is awesome. I frequently reference that manual. So if you are looking to buy a giant book, I would recommend that one. So that is all I have. And I see there's a lot in the chat.
That was fantastic, Adrian. Thank you so much. It was pretty thorough on the nutrition, and you also squeezed in a lot of other stuff about housing and handling and whatnot. So yeah, I guess I'll hand it over to Amber if she wants to tackle the questions.
Absolutely. So before I jump into the questions, I just want to add that hopefully the people that are going to talk about off-calf are around. So if you're interested in funding, stick around. Don't run off. But for the questions, there are a few in the chat, so I'll read them off for you, and then hopefully we can get some answers. The one here is, I have suspected I have an iodine deficiency used with very, very micro goitres, similar to the milk. You're gonna have to forgive me, I'm not a sheep producer, but very, very micro goitres, similar to the milk goitres on the lambs from a good quality ewe milk. I have painted iodine 7% on their tail bottoms and have noticed a difference in the word that I cannot pronounce. I'm sorry, goitres. Is there a better way to check iodine levels, or is that required by a vet?
So checking iodine levels, checking any mineral levels, about the only way you can do it is with a blood test or a liver biopsy. So that would have to be done by a vet, and they can send it. Again, I don't know if the U of C vet lab does, but I know Saskatchewan's does. If you're seeing iodine deficiency, I would suggest doing a feed test and seeing what your other minerals look like. Like I just said, we recently found one here in kind of west central Saskatchewan that we're suspecting is selenium toxicity causing iodine deficiency. So unfortunately, blood or liver is about the only way you can check a mineral.
Warren asked if there, or Warren, Nathan, or Olivia asked if there is a free place to do water testing for the 4-H kids' knowledge. This might be hard with you being in Saskatchewan, but
That A&L lab in Ontario is $40, I think. I think Down to Earth also has a water test. You can send them to the Roy Romano Provincial Lab in Saskatchewan, but it is $104 for out of province. So unfortunately, I don't know of any free ones in Alberta.
I know for Alberta, if it's like there is free water testing for your water well for like the house. That's through the Health Link, but it does very clearly outline that it's not for farm usage. So I do believe in Alberta you also have to use those same labs. So unfortunately, no, but that would be something cool that maybe could come in the future. Jolene did add here that Sheep Bites is $100 for the first subscription and then $50 per renewal each year for an individual. Commercial is $200 initially and then $100 yearly renewal.
Thanks, Jolene.
And then, yeah, if any of you guys are interested in Sheep Bites, Jolene and the Alberta Lamb Producers is the one that administers that program. I'll make sure that we link that website in the email that we send out with everything for you guys so you guys can reach out to them. There was another question. If you have dirt floors in your barn, what do you do to sterilize, or sorry, what do you sterilize jugs with?
So that is tricky. It's really hard to sterilize dirt floor because it is dirt. I actually have recently looked on the CFIA website to see what they have for disinfectants. There's something called, I think it's Actisan 360, and it keeps the barn dry. So while that won't sterilize the jugs, it will reduce some of the moisture in the dirt. Unfortunately, there's just not a lot you can do to sterilize dirt. So just put some clean straw in would be about your best bet in that case.
Do you have any suggestions on anything you can do to control ticks?
That is a bad question. I wish I could help, but that is a bad question.
We also have, I think this is in reference to like guardians. Do horses work? Because we keep sheep with my sister's 2 horses right beside my siblings' cows and pigs. Any idea on horses for keeping predators away?
I think the general gist is if the horses are mean enough to take a coyote or whatever your predator is, you're probably okay. If you're worrying more about cougars or wolves, I'd be skeptical about a horse being able to do it. But sometimes if there's just something bigger than the sheep with them, that'll do it. It's hard to say.
Do you guys have any ideas on where someone could learn more about wool production and where they could sell wool?
As for selling wool, I would probably advise you to talk to wool growers in Lethbridge. If you're interested in the wool production side, shoot me an email and I'll see what I can dig you up for links. Montana State University has a wool lab we were talking about before this started here. So they would I'll see what I can find for them. And I see a chat there. Carstairs Custom Woolen Mills would also be good.
This is actually a really good question. I was curious too. Are there any interspecies diseases that are like transmittable? I'm assuming both to species and to human and sheep.
There are. I think with every animal, we need to be concerned about interspecies. I didn't look to see if anyone's in the bighorn sheep overlap area. Sheep and bighorn sheep are a big one. Bison are another big one. Bison and sheep and cattle can share malignant catarrhal fever. Cattle and sheep doesn't seem too bad of a combination, but sheep and bison are pretty nasty. So bison need to be kept fairly far away. And there are some zoonotic diseases that sheep can carry, like Q fever is one of them. You'll get super sick, and it's during lambing, so wash your hands, wear gloves. Orf is another common one that you can share. So there are a few, but generally, if you follow basic hand washing, gloves, that kind of thing, do your best to protect yourself. Yeah.
When creep feeding lambs, do you have to make the feed smaller or can it be full crops?
I would probably crack the grain just because they're little. Full grown sheep can chew whole kernels, so you don't need to grind barley or corn for the adults, but it wouldn't hurt to at least crack it. I wouldn't go for a full grind because we don't want them to just inhale it and get acidosis, but a crack or a roll would be good.
Perfect. So the next one is we plan on using a 2-acre crop for our sheep. I heard fresh alfalfa causes bloating issues in sheep. We have rolled and dried alfalfa. Like, I guess, is there less likely to cause bloat with rolled and dried, or is there a bloat issue?
There's still going to be a bloat issue. You're going to see less likely. Anytime you're feeding something that's high in alfalfa, I suggest just keep an eye on them. You'll notice if they're starting to bloat because their left side will get big. So just keep an eye on them. There's not much you can do. Have some bloaties on hand if you're feeding a really high alfalfa diet. I think there's something you can put in the water too, but I don't remember what it's called.
We will be recording and sharing the video along with, I do believe we are okay to share the slides with anybody, so I can definitely get that out to you guys. We will, in that email, it'll be on the YouTube channels, I believe on both Leduc and Farming Forward's YouTube channels, and then we'll also have links to like Alberta lamb producers and any other ones that we have there. Um, how would you get a how would you get a mineral for your sheep? What if your feed changes from year to year based on what's available to you? Would you change mineral every year as well?
That's a great question. Generally, your mineral's going to stay pretty static unless you're seeing like really high selenium or really high copper or sulfur or something. It will change a little bit based on what you have available. So there are some, even though I know I said forage is wildly variable, we do have some general rules. Alfalfa is generally going to be pretty high calcium compared to phosphorus. So we want our calcium to phosphorus to be a 2-to-1 ratio in the whole diet. We don't want it to drop below 1.5, and we don't want it to go over 6. So generally alfalfa, we're going to have a good calcium to phosphorus ratio. If you're feeding a cereal forage or a cereal grain, high in cereal grain, cereals tend to have higher phosphorus and calcium or equal phosphorus and calcium. So in that case, you might want to go to a 3-to-1 mineral or add some limestone. So just kind of keep an eye on that calcium to phosphorus ratio unless you're having major mineral problems, and get 2-to-1 or a 3-to-1, whatever's going to balance you out.
So yeah, someone added that in Alberta there's a Carstairs wool mill. Check them out. They'll buy wool from producers. What do you do? What would you do about Movi? MOVI? I'm not sure.
Um,
So that's Alec or Alexis, sorry.
I think mycoplasma, that one. I would say that's a vet question.
Perfect. Do you know if there's any spreadable diseases to yaks from sheep?
I do not know that one, but I will look it up. If you want to shoot me an email, then I can get you an answer.
Okay, we have a long one. We currently have 2 lambs that we are bottle feeding as our son's 4-H project. We are using Brober's milk replacer and following their guidelines and ratio for water to replacer, and the lambs will not finish the recommended amount. The producer gave us the ratio she uses, which is nearly half of what the brand is recommending. Do you have a recommendation on how to adjust this so that they're getting the correct nutrition? One was born January 2nd, the other one was born the 11th.
Um, I would say, yeah, if adjust to what will get the amount. So if you're thinning it out, you'll need more because we're just diluting it. So whatever gets the most nutrition in them, however you have to get it in them. I would say at 3 weeks old, yeah, you can go ahead and give them some hay, some good alfalfa hay and some grain. Especially if they're eating the bedding, give them some hay to munch on.
There was some talk about that. Shauna did mention that if we did have time, we'd love more information on lamb finishing and feeding. Let me see if we can get this other question. Any forage species to avoid or species that sheep naturally won't graze?
I did not study up on my poisonous plants before this. Generally, sheep are going to be less picky than cattle, a little more picky than goats. There's not a lot of stuff that I would say to avoid. Again, if you're on something like alfalfa, I would watch for bloat, but I'm not thinking of anything popping up. I know it's not really a forage species, but I would not graze straight kochia. Kochia can cause all sorts of crazy things. So I can't think of any tame forages that sheep wouldn't really go for.
That one. When weaning, does the lamb and the ewe have to be separate in different pens?
Probably for a bit. I don't think they make paddles small enough for lambs, so you need to get the lamb off of the ewe to stop from sucking. So I would separate them even if it's just for a few days to get them stop sucking, get them figured out and on feed.
I heard that Waldron is using sheep to manage invasives. How would you determine their nutrition overall when they're used that way?
Yes, there is that is popping up more and more. We don't really have nutritive values for these invasive species like leafy spurge and such. Depending on what you're putting on those invasives would be kind of my concern level. If we're putting ewes that are just maintaining, they're not pregnant, we're not trying to breed them, I wouldn't panic too hard putting them on invasives. When you're doing that targeted grazing, they're in very high management. So you've got someone with them all day, every day. So I wouldn't stress too bad about their nutrition there. We are seeing more and more in Saskatchewan of people taking growing lambs and trying to use them on solar panels or targeted grazing situations and just sticking them out there for a few months and then bringing them back and the lambs haven't grown. So in that case, you're probably not going to have a lot of success and you're going to need to supplement with grain or something to keep those lambs growing. But if they're just ewes maintaining, hanging out, I wouldn't panic too much. I don't know if that's a very clear answer.
So maybe we'll do these last two quickly. And then we'll maybe, yeah. Do you have any suggestions on like stocking rates for sheep in the summer? And then also like what's your opinion on them doing brush clearing?
Stocking rates would depend on where you live and what your pasture production is. So I'm not going to give a full, good, hard number there. As for brush clearing, depending on the brush, I've seen sheep eat caraganas. Didn't kill them, the caraganas. It didn't kill the sheep either, but they can help. They can munch it down. Goats might be better if you're looking specifically for brush clearing, though.
Okay. Maybe if you don't mind, Adrian, if we could, like, are you able to give like a short answer to the feeding and finishing, or is that quite in depth?
I can give an overview quick. I don't know how thorough it'll be.
Maybe we
Um,
could always see about having you back, maybe to dive a little bit farther into that.
yeah.
Um, I was just going to use it as an example. If you guys want, I will. I'm just gonna quickly pop on that other presentation and we'll see if Sonia's on there. Just because I don't want to keep you too long, Adrian. I know it's quite a bit later for you. So, but yeah, I appreciate all the questions that are on here from everybody. And then while I'm just loading that, I'm gonna really quickly put the survey in there, and then hopefully we got all of the questions. I'll take a peek when this is going on there.
Yeah, and if you want to shoot me an email, like I know there's a lot of 4-H clubs, I can probably do up like a little fact sheet or something for you guys, and that might be easier.
That would be amazing. Oh no, I stopped the two. Can you guys see that okay, I believe? Okay, perfect. And then we just got to, sorry guys, I have lost my screen. Okay, if we can see if we can get Sonia on. If not, I can quickly touch on this. Um, while we're waiting for a few more questions. Are we able to get unmuted? Okay, it's not working. So, let's see. Sorry to make you guys wait there a second. We'll make sure that we get Adrian's email out to you guys. And I'm hoping we have Sonia on here. Okay. I don't think it's working, so I'll just quickly touch on this from our understanding of Sonia. Essentially, the OFCAF is considered the On-Farm Climate Action Fund. It is grant funding. We are not the people who put it on, so I just wanted to offer you guys a little bit of information that it is provided on grazing and it does work with sheep. And like a lot of people do with cattle, there's money for fencing to do like the different types of grazing plans. They do mentorship and grazing plan development, and then they also do extension activities that are involved with it. They are also hosting another webinar series that I thought you guys might find interesting about rotational grazing, specifically with sheep and goats. And it is in February and March. You would go to CFCW or, sorry, CFGA. I'm getting my acronyms mixed up now. Or Erica to find the link for this. Or if you guys want to scan, you're more than welcome. We also do have this in our newsletter if any of you guys are interested in learning about grazing. And then we do have, or sorry, these are the 5 sessions that they're going to be covering, just a little bit of information on them. And, whoops. Sonia's information or contacts would be through Erica, and she'd be the person to reach out to. We could also hopefully throw their email in the chat for you guys, but just wanted to get that information out there for everybody. And yeah, I'll just see if there is any last questions in here for Adrian. And if not, I do appreciate you all being there. And am I missing anything, Sharon, too?
I think we've covered it all. That was a great presentation and really good questions.
Yeah, and thank you very much for presenting, Adrian. And Jolene, I'm glad you were able to still be here. And we do appreciate that you gave us the contact and information for Adrian to present. And great to see how many people you had show up today. So thank you for everybody.
Yeah. All right. Hope to see you in a couple weeks, maybe. Some of you.
Absolutely.